Welcome back to Words of Paradise. I'm your host, Leon Idle, and superhero movies are dying. We all know this, whether it be Marvel not catering to their legitimate fans and instead shoving political messages in their films, whether it be superhero fatigue, whether it be the DC trying for like the third time to start a universe, we're definitely seeing the decline. Superhero films have peaked, but people don't want to accept that. Mostly the media doesn't want to accept that, Hollywood doesn't want to accept that, and rather than blaming all the true and obvious reasons for the superhero decline, they'd rather blame nostalgia and Tobey Maguire. Check this out. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man ushers in a potentially harmful form of nostalgia. Nostalgia, the thing that Disney has been coasting on for the last, decade. I mean, yeah, let's blame Tobey Maguire and Spider-Man for all the nostalgia bait that Disney and the MCU has put out. You know, the Star Wars movies with all the member berries, that's not driven by nostalgia. All those crappy live-action Disney remakes like, Beauty and the Beast or Cinderella, Lion King, that's not driven by nostalgia. But Tobey Maguire, ooh, man, he's the fault here. Tobey Maguire says he'd like to come back as Spider-Man. While this might make some fans happy, it could set a dangerous precedent for the MCU. If it was such a dangerous precedent, why bring Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire back for Spider-Man No Way Home? Don't get me wrong, I think nostalgia is a major problem in the movie industry as a whole. Heck, in the entertainment industry, whether it be movies, video games, card games, nostalgia as a whole is hindering entertainment media nowadays. But to throw it all on Tobey Maguire and the MCU, I think that's a pretty heavy cope. Let's read this article. Recently, Tobey Maguire said he'd like to play Spider-Man again following his appearance in Spider-Man No Way Home, and many fans seem to be on board with the idea. While capitalizing on viewers' nostalgia for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy could be a wise business move for Marvel, it could also signal a lack of creativity at the studio. Oh, yeah, that's what signals the lack of creativity. She-Hulk wasn't a signal of a lack of creativity. Falcon Winter Soldier, certainly, that wasn't a showing of a lack of creativity. Miss Marvel? Nah, Miss Marvel was creative as you can get. What you talking about, son? Yeah, bring back Tobey Maguire. That is what shows doom for creativity at Marvel, not the abysmal entirety that was Phase 4. In a film landscape that is already dominated by sequels, remakes, adaptations, and entries into cinematic universes, original film ideas have already started to feel like the exception, not the norm. Oh! It's almost like that thing that I've been complaining about for literal years at this point. But yeah, thanks, comic book resources. Now that you've said it, of course, no, you're jumping on a trend. People like me have been saying this for years, and now that you're finally losing clicks and losing money, and realizing, oh man, I might be wrong, you're gonna try and backpedal. This has been the case since probably 2016 or so. Here we are in 2023. If you're just now getting it, then you never were gonna get it. This is lip service at this point, CBR. While the Marvel Cinematic Universe itself is part of the problem, it at least makes some exciting creative decisions. No, at least not anymore. It used to. It absolutely used to. But even all of that has worn thin the last 5 years or so. So far, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has found some of its biggest successes by making creative decisions both with the films it makes and the people it casts. However, if it's just trying to cater to fans' nostalgia for previous versions of characters, it could keep the MCU from continuing to grow. No, what keeps the MCU from continuing to grow is putting out crap that people don't like that has no point in existing. Crap, like I mentioned, like She-Hulk, like Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness. I will never get over the fact that I hate that movie, since Sam Raimi is my favorite director, and yet that movie is garbage. It's mind-blowing. When you put out something that even a die-hard Sam Raimi fan like myself doesn't like, you screwed the proverbial pooch there, Marvel. This has nothing to do with nostalgia for previous characters. It has to do with bad product. Believe it or not, people are more intelligent than you give them credit for, and they can realize bad product when you see it. She-Hulk is just, unfortunately, an objectively bad product, despite the fact that her character is an awesome comic book character. At least it was in the 80s and 90s. Can't say so much for today, but there really aren't any good modern comic book characters today. Let's continue. It could also face an internal conflict between its fans over which version of the characters they'd like to see more of, similar to the issues DC is currently experiencing, with some fans wanting the Snyderverse to continue and others to move on. Oh no! Nerds having nerdy conversations about what versions of characters they like more. Spoiler alert, at least with Spider-Man, we already do this. We already talk about Tobey versus Andrew versus Tom. Well, we talk about Tobey versus Tom Holland. I don't think Andrew's really in that discussion. Point is, nerds have been literally arguing about differences and things since the beginning of fandom. It's been happening in D&D. Oh, what's better, the fighter or the barbarian? It's been happening in Magic the Gathering. What's better, Golgari or Dimir? Like, literally, in fandom, Fans argue. That's part of the love we have for it. The debates. You're acting like this is a bad thing, like we all need to get along in some sort of portal that's filled with sunshines and rainbows and roses and smelly goods. No. The debate over our favorite versions of characters, over our favorite storylines, over our favorite games, that's part of being in fandom. This is what shows you're outsiders and why we didn't gatekeep hard enough. Because real fans and real members of fandom would look at this like a good thing, because it is a good thing. You're over here calling it internal conflict, when it's not internal conflict, it is fun discussions. You know how many times, back when I had roommates, I lived with roommates, do you know how many times we would stay up late night debating comic books, because we were both comic book nerds? You know how often we saw eye to eye? Very rarely. But there's still super fun memories that I have, because debating comic books and debating something you love with someone else that loves that same thing is fun. It's a core part of fandom. How you guys have lost the plot this bad, like I said, you guys never had the plot to begin with. Comic book resources, yeah right, you're a resource for nothing. The MCU is built on innovation, not nostalgia. It is entirely possible that Disney would have wanted to have kicked off the Marvel Cinematic Universe with more popular characters like Spider-Man or the X-Men. However, due to licensing issues, Marvel was forced to think outside the box, which is how Iron Man came to be. Not only is Iron Man a great film on its own, but it also introduced a character fans loved so much that they continue to mourn his fictional death. Perhaps inspired by the success of Iron Man, the studio continued to release projects focused on characters who were a bit more obscure. Guardians of the Galaxy was another surprise hit for the studio, and it definitely didn't owe its success to nostalgia. Well, no, it didn't, but I wouldn't call it a surprise hit. At least it wasn't a surprise to me when it happened. By the time Guardians of the Galaxy came out, we're in Phase 2, Marvel had definitely established itself. People were engrossed in the idea of the MCU. They were engrossed in this idea of something they'd never seen before, an interconnected story, an interconnected universe full of movies that are going to culminate in something big. The seeds have been planted. Guardians of the Galaxy, even if people didn't want to see it for the Guardians themselves, they wanted to know the story. It's that simple. So they felt like, they had to go. And thank God the movie ended up being incredible. I mean, even outside of MCU standards, I will say the Guardians of the Galaxy on its own is an incredible, incredible movie. So it's great that people end up loving it, but they were going to see it anyway because Marvel had already built that trust with the audience about the long, overarching story. Marvel has all but destroyed that trust with Phase 4. As the MCU Guardians differed heavily from their comic book counterparts, some might go so far as to say that Tony Stark built the MCU in a cave with a box of scraps. The early MCU didn't just take risks in terms of characters, but also casting decisions. Though Robert Downey Jr. had been recognized for his earlier work by critics, he had never really starred in a massive blockbuster action film before. However, Marvel still rolled the dice on Downey instead of going with the seemingly safer option of Tom Cruise. Now, it's hard to imagine a world where anyone but Robert Downey Jr. got the role, but his personality became so intertwined with that of Tony Stark, Marvel Studios also provided it would rather recast a role than try to push a version of a character that didn't work. Both Terrence Howard and Edward Norton were recast with Don Cheadle and Mark Ruffalo, respectively, with the latter two actors going on to give great performances. Yeah, but Terrence Howard and Edward Norton were recast not because a version of the character didn't work, but because the actors were douchebags behind the set. Like, that's the real reason, and we all know it. Ed Norton and Terrence Howard were both nightmares to work with. And Disney, at this point, the MCU wasn't the MCU yet. They could afford to just tell an actor to scooch and get someone new. Nowadays, we can't give credit for that. That would not fly. Reliance on nostalgia could stunt the MCU's growth. Well, there is no growth right now. There has only been regression. Nostalgia seems to have extended beyond just fans wanting to see the same characters to fans wanting the original actors in those roles again. This has led not only Tobey Maguire's return as Spider-Man, but also Andrew Garfield's. Patrick Stewart had his cameo as Professor X in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and Hugh Jackman will be reprising his role as Wolverine in Deadpool 3. Tom Holland's Spider-Man was already struggling to form his own identity, with the first two films having such strong ties with Iron Man, and his third solo outing was overshadowed by the return of Maguire and Garfield. Instead of giving fans new versions of Professor X and Wolverine, Marvel decided to cash in on nostalgia and bring back the old versions. Rather than moving the MCU forward creatively, these moves were rooted more firmly in the past than they ever had been. You can't win. You really can't win. I've been complaining about this, like I said, I've been complaining about nostalgia and memorabilia for years. I'm being told I'm being too harsh a critic. I'm the douchebag. Now, I'm sitting over here and I'm like, yeah, the MCU occasionally throws a nostalgic character in there. That's not a big deal, because to me, it really isn't compared to all the other issues, and now I'm still being told I'm wrong. Like, there's no winning either way. Look, nostalgia is a bad thing in general if it is overused and if that's all you're offering. If you're just cashing in nostalgia and nostalgia alone. That's what live-action Aladdin did. It cashed in nostalgia and nostalgia alone, didn't do anything new or original, except a couple original songs that weren't even that good, and it got, demolished by most people, but praised by a few idiots. The MCU has some legitimate problems, mostly when it comes down to how they treat their special effects individuals, how they treat their VFX crew, bad writing, and political ham-fisted pandering messages. Right now, I'm not worried about nostalgia. If we can clean up all the actual big problems and nostalgia, becomes an issue, don't get me wrong, I'll start complaining about that again, but right now, it's real low on the list compared to other stuff happening in pop culture and entertainment. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy is still enjoyable to watch, which is why there's such an attachment to that version of the character. However, those films had their time, and Marvel has since moved to very different projects. Yeah, well, if you ask me, the MCU has had its time as well, and I'm going to say it. I'll be entirely honest with you. I think the Raimi trilogy of Spider-Man, I think that's going to be more timeless than the MCU. I really do. I think that in 10, 20 years, I think we will more fondly remember the Sam Raimi trilogy, yeah, even the third one for you haters out there, than we will the vast majority of films in the MCU. According to Statista, more than half the audience for Marvel films tend to be in the 18 to 34-year-old range. As time passes, people who hold strong nostalgia for Tobey Maguire's portrayal of Spider-Man are starting to age out of this target demographic. If younger audiences are suddenly being told they have to watch a film from 20-plus years ago to follow along, they may just decide to skip the new Tobey Maguire film. This wouldn't only hurt the MCU creatively, but also financially if audiences lost interest in seeing the same people and characters too many times. Nostalgia may be good for a quick buck, but Marvel needs to focus on its new characters if it wants to reach the heights of Avengers Endgame again. No, it doesn't. Marvel does not need to focus on its new characters. Let's think about its new characters. The new Black Panther. I don't even remember her name. She's garbage. Namor. Garbage. She-Hulk. Garbage. Miss Marvel. Garbage. Brie Larson's not new, but let's just throw her in there because it's funny. Brie Larson. Garbage. Monica Rambeau. Could have been cool. In the comics, Monica Rambeau is very cool. But because of how she was done in the MCU, garbage. Honestly, it feels like I'm attacking women here. It does, and I don't want it to come off like that. But most new characters have been female characters, and they've sucked. Moon Knight, garbage. Not Oscar Isaac's fault. He's an incredible actor. Show just isn't good. Moon Knight, garbage. There you go. There's another man in there for you. Yeah, that's all I got. I'm sure if I sat here and thought about it, I could come up with more, but those were all just off the top of my dome. Look, at the end of the day, the MCU's finished. The MCU is done, and it's not because of nostalgia. It's not because people are getting, oh, we want Tobey Maguire back, and that's going to be a problem in the long run. The problem is that Marvel beat a dead horse for far too long with things that people don't care about, like, pandering and identity politics, and it's also just not been very good writing, and people are smart enough to know what good writing is. Why did Top Gun Maverick make over $1 billion? Why did James Cameron's Avatar make over $1 billion? However, Doctor Strange, Thor Love and Thunder, both those didn't crack the bill mark. I mean, they're Marvel movies. They're MCU movies. Those should be over $1 billion. No, they shouldn't. Because the time of the over $1 billion superhero movie is over because we've been burned by superhero films and because of superhero fatigue in general. I think they should have taken a much longer hiatus after Endgame, if you ask me. But, again, I'm not the one making creative decisions at Marvel. Disney is a content machine. They're just pumping out content to keep viewers satisfied, and I wouldn't even call it that. But that's just my thoughts on it. Let me know yours in the comments below, or you can let me know on Twitter, where you can find me at BoltTheWord. And please do subscribe and check out the back catalog. I do nerdy news every day from Marvel, superheroes, anime, Star Wars, you name it. It's all here in the nerdosphere, so please subscribe, because this has been Words of Paradise.